going to be speaking tonight about reading comprehension and strategies that can be used to connect, the way reading comprehension is taught at school to the way it can be supported at home.
We just want to welcome everyone that is here tonight and just take an opportunity to introduce ourselves. My name is Rachel Shaniker. I have graduated with Carly and Georgia from the Masters of Reading program in December of last year. And currently I am a math specialist. I moved into this role for this year, but was previously a first grade teacher for 8 years. So although I'm teaching math this year, reading was part of my world for a very long time. And then the specialist role is something I've moved into.
My name is Georgia Racanelli, and I've been a first grade teacher for 5 years.
And I'm Carly Norman, and I taught kindergarten for 4 years. This is my 5th year teaching, and I just moved into a reading specialist and literacy coach role at my same school in Pompton Lakes, which is a K-5 school, so elementary. So yeah, that's a bit about us, and I think we can hop into it.
Okay, so we're going to start off by just talking a little bit about what reading comprehension is. It was a main focus in our program, and when you think about the definition of reading comprehension, it's really just understanding what you've just read, but also being able to talk about it and understand and talk to others. What we want to focus on tonight is comprehension versus accuracy and decoding. For example, a parent might say to you, my child can read all of the words in the newspaper. She can read. But you could say to that parent, does she understand what she's reading? Because reading comprehension is just as important as being able to decode the words with accuracy. So reading comprehension truly prepares students to think critically in the real world, make inferences, question the text, and then determine the importance of that information as they begin to move on with that information beyond the text.
So the reason that we chose to focus on reading comprehension was that throughout our time working together, during the master's program, we all realized that we were facing a similar issue, that students needed support with their reading comprehension. We're kindergarten and first grade teachers primarily, and so we always have a focus on reading comprehension, but the pandemic has definitely, really impacted the way students are comprehending as they read. So we've noticed this, in the classroom, and then as, with the stilted school hours last year, parents sort of, became teachers at home. And as a result, we found that they were reaching out to us, asking for ways that they could support their children at home. And we sort of found in talking to them that their natural instinct was to say, I want to support my child with their reading. So I want to help them make sure they understand, make sure they can read all these words, as Rachel was saying. Kind of they focus on decoding as a milestone for being able to read. And they were sort of asking for those sorts of strategies. And so we really wanted to gear them more towards reading comprehension, which is just sort of the natural conversation you have around your own thinking about a book. With that said, parents can't do it all. They don't have to do it all. That's what we're here for. So we can sort of do the heavy lifting at school now that we're back with our full day. There's no longer a loss of, learning. We're here all together. And so parents can choose to just focus on one simple thing at home and really spend their time enjoying reading with their child.
So the resource that we put together kind of really came out of what Georgia so well articulated. It was just there was a need. We found the parents were focusing on the decoding, and they wanted to make that home and school connection stronger. And we really did find there was a trend between all three of us that parents wanted to do more. They just had to be empowered to be able to do the right thing. So we really created this to try to reinforce the skills that children were learning at school and bring them into the home. So kind of leave that decoding to the side and focus on the meaning making and the joy and the love for reading that we want to foster. So we figured that by focusing on comprehension, which is it's the reason that we read, to make meaning. So focusing on that is kind of creating minimal work for the parents because they're not focusing on the nitty-gritty of decoding words and accuracy. But that minimal work that they can put in based on what we put together really has a huge payoff, because if children are seeing their parents reading to them at home and they're having those experiences together, they will grow to love reading more because of all of the things that we will go into in just a few minutes. So that's me, sorry. So we created this parent resource, and what it is just a PDF that you'll all gain access to after this, and it defines what reading comprehension is, what we just went through. It defines 6 strategies for parents to use before reading, during, and after, and you'll also leave here with a printable reading strategy bookmark, which is just easy to reference for parents. And I have shared this as a reading specialist with many of the parents that I work with, and they've really found that it's helped them out in just having some talking points while they're reading with their children. And then lastly, what you'll leave here with is book choice guidelines, because that's another big part about reading at home, is how to choose a text. So that's also something that you'll get after this.
Okay, so one of the things we were thinking about when we decided to put together this resource is how we wanted to structure it. We decided to put it in the format of before, during, and after reading, because we know as teachers that it's important to focus on those 3 areas when talking about comprehension and reading a book with a child. But it's not the natural instinct of a parent or someone who isn't a teacher to break it down in that way. So we had to keep in mind that parents are unfamiliar with these strategies, and that something that might come naturally to us as teachers don't come naturally to parents when they're reading a book with their child. They might just open that book and start reading it, but there's so much that can be done before you open the text. And some of the things that you'll see in the resource are activating background knowledge by making connections, giving parents some STEM questions to ask their child in order to activate background knowledge, some things about looking at the cover and making connections and discussing the purpose of the text itself, and just having a conversation before even that book is opened to get them ready for reading. Another strategy we include in the resource is teaching parents how to take a picture walk, something that K-5 educators do when they read picture books, is they look through the text and they preview it and they think about what's happening in the pictures, as well as some important vocabulary words or features of the text that the child might need to pay attention to while reading. And it can kind of get them ready for the text before they start reading from the beginning.
So the next strategies that we included were strategies that parents can use during their reading with their child. This we thought was important to include because this isn't necessarily a part of the comprehension conversations parents would naturally tend to include. You know, before and after sort of makes sense. They may not think to stop multiple times throughout the text. You know, stopping during reading and really thinking about it and monitoring, am I understanding or am I confused? That's a skill that's really important that we work on all the time in the classroom. So having parents be able to really simply reinforce that at home with these, you know, very simple strategies is a really, really great thing. So the 2 strategies that we included for during reading are actually pretty similar. The first one is to just have the parents pause and talk with their child throughout the text. So parents choosing intentional moments to stop, possibly every few pages or when something really important has happened, and to just discuss the story with their child by asking some of these questions. You know, what's happening? What do you think about what they said? What could happen next? And really encouraging parents to think, if they're confused, not just to sort of brush that under the rug and keep going, but to work with them until they've worked through that confusion and then they really understand what's going on. So, you know, by discussing what it is exactly is confusing them, and then, you know, giving examples, looking things up, or rereading to help them work through that. The second strategy we included is more of a child-led strategy. So in the first strategy, parents are leading the stopping and talking. They're choosing when to stop. And this is something that parents, that we as teachers remind kids to do and help them to do in the classroom. So parents are just reminding the kids, stop yourself. When you get confused or you're stuck in the middle of the book, stop yourself and say, do I have this or not so much? And then this is really emphasizing the importance of vocalizing your confusion, vocalizing what makes sense to you as a reader, and empowering students to really feel comfortable working through the text and making sure that they understand it.
So I don't know if I mentioned this when I was going through what this will entail, but this bookmark will also have all of these talking points, many of the talking points for before, during, and after on it. So it's great for parents to reference. So after reading is also really important, and we know that as teachers because that's where a lot of the connections come in, whether it's connections to other texts, connections to our lives, or summarizing, retelling, all those key elements that really help us make sense of what we read. So after reading, one of the things that we suggest to do is to talk about the big ideas or the themes or big moments that happened in the story. And some questions that parents can ask are, what did the story make you think about? You can insert different parts of the story to finish the question frames, like at the end of the story, this happened. Has something like that ever happened to you? Or the story talks about this. What do you think about that? So you'll notice a lot of these questions are really open-ended because we want children to be able to say more and to elaborate on what they're thinking. So you might want to discuss why your child agrees or disagrees with the theme or the character's choices or different interactions in the text. So then after you discuss all those big ideas, then a great thing to do after reading for parents is to try to have the child retell or summarize. Now, like we said, we're kindergarten and first grade teachers or former kindergarten and first grade teachers. So both of those skills are really hard for our young readers. So again, that's where a lot of the modeling might come in, which we've outlined in the document, is that for the first couple of times or even for a long time, a parent might read a story to a child and have to summarize for the child or say, let's remember what's important. They can go back and take a picture walk at the end of the story, just like they did at the beginning, and try to summarize or tell the parts of the story in order, and they could use the pictures to remind them what comes next.
Okay, so we've been referencing the strategy bookmark throughout this presentation. This is a snapshot of it. It will also be included in the resource that you get after this presentation as a printable. So as you can see, it's broken down into those 3 sections that we spoke about. But the great thing about it is that it includes questions that the parents can use while reading that could apply to any book. So something that this would be helpful for a parent is to just keep this bookmark as a bookmark or near where they read with their child at home, so that when those natural questions don't come to their mind, they can reference this and use it as a resource to support their child's comprehension during that text. So you can see that there are some questions for before reading, such as, what does the cover make you think about? Or have we ever read any other books by this author? Maybe that could spark some conversation about what that book would be about. Or during reading, something like, why do you think the character did or said that? Or what do you think will happen next? Or how does it make you feel? And then, as Carly mentioned, after reading is just as important to not close the book and put it away, but to really see what they can take from the story itself or the text itself. And you can ask, the parents can ask questions like, what did this story make you think about? Or this story talks about such, and what did you think about that? So there are many open-ended prompts and questions that the parents can use for any situation.
And the final thing that we chose to include in this resource was some guidelines for helping parents choose books. This is another super common thing that parents reach out about, like, my kid's picking this kind of book or this kind of book, is it the right thing? So we sort of boiled it down to 3 main things that can help parents help their child to choose a book. So the first point is to balance who's choosing the book. It's great to get a mix of students or children choosing their own books and parents choosing books too. While a child may pick a book that's way too easy or way too hard, it does really increase their investment in wanting to read this because they've chosen something likely that they're interested in. And so you can balance that out by having parents or teachers provide suggestions too. If you're ever in doubt, it's a great idea to let the child choose and then use all those comprehension strategies that we've just gone through to support them, either to push them if it's a really easy book, or to really help them get through it if it's a trickier book. Another thing that can come up is whether or not a book is appropriate for a child. Books often have age guidelines, and that's sort of something that we've outlined for the parents, usually in the back or in the inside cover. Parents can also skim the book. The resource that you guys will all get has a couple links to some great websites that have reference lists for certain ages. Here's some great books. And the last thing that really comes up is my child is choosing a book that is always way too easy or always way too hard. And they want to know, what do I do about this? Is this okay? Should I be pushing them in one way or the other? And I think a lot of that stems from teachers sometimes assigning an independent reading level, and students sort of hold on to that. Parents sometimes hold on to that too. And so it's important. We wanted to remind parents that your reading level doesn't limit the books that you can read. It's a great starting point, but interest should play an important role too. So it's okay if the book is way too easy or way too hard. Like I mentioned before, the comprehension strategies can either help get into some really deep thinking or help you work through a tricky book. And different leveled books just allows us to focus on different skills. So you may end up a little deeper in this conversation or a little deeper in that conversation based on the level of difficulty of the book. And so all of that is outlined for the parents in the resource as well.
So just sharing, we are going to be sharing the parent guide from us to you, and feel free to share it with parents that you come in contact with if you're already a teacher, or with colleagues of yours. Like I said, I've shared it with a couple of parents so far this year, and I think it's been really helpful, especially those book choice guidelines. We're going to post a link in the chat, and you'll have a copy downloaded right to your computer. And just, I think, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I have the link. I can send it in now.
Perfect. That's perfect. Another thing that came up in my mind while Georgia was just talking is that you'll notice all of this is just through conversation. And a lot of parents have said to me before, this seems so basic or so elementary that it's all through conversation, and they're not writing anything, they're not responding to anything. But really, if you think about it, all the things that we're having them do before, during, and after reading are skills that they're going to build upon once they get older in school, once they're asked to write a written response to something, or to summarize, or to retell, or make a connection. So doing this all through talking first and conversations will make things much easier for the child as they go through school and as they grow. So just something to keep in mind.
I think that's a really good point, Carly. And I think that goes back to like the why that we spoke about at the beginning. Mm-hmm. We don't want parents to feel like they have to give their children assignments and teach them things that they're not prepared to teach. But a conversation about a text or a story is enjoyable for both the parent and the child. So while it's preparing them for school and for what they need to do, what teachers might ask them to do, it also is providing like an enjoyable experience and memorable experience for the parent and the child both.
So that's it. That's our presentation. We hope you guys enjoyed it and that you got something, useful out of this. Definitely take a moment to click the link. It'll just download a copy right to your computer. You can save it so you won't lose it. And thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks. I think we have time for questions and thoughts and things to share, right? So, yes. and maybe, I guess for now you can, well, I was going to say leave it up, but I think that's okay. So there was a number of things I think you said that were really interesting, but the last one, talking about parents' perceptions of what kind of schoolwork is and what reading support is. I just had a nightmare about like walking into somebody's bedroom and like seeing all their books leveled in bins, right? Like some poor kid's books being leveled in buckets. So I think that's a really important point to talk to parents about, that, you know, you're not doing assignments with them, right? You're reading for the same reasons that we all read, which means that there are some that are, you know, are based on interest, and we're learning new things and kind of like pushing our understanding. But there's going to be some times where we read books that may be considered too easy, right? But are emotionally nutritious, right? That like we go back to because it provides support. It makes us feel safe. It makes us feel warm, you know, these types of things. And so the idea that like, you know, every book that a kid reads at home has to be cardio workout, right? That's not the case at all, right? And that's not the message that we're sending to parents. So I think that's really important, that you can support them, but you're not replicating perhaps the worst aspects of school, right? With this sort of like, you know, homework. So I also thought of the opposite of that, you know, which was like book stacking, right? Which is like a strategy we use sometimes in the classroom where, you know, a student will get like 3-4 books and put them on a chair and be like, this is what I like to read, or this is what I'm going to read, right? And so, you know, book stacking is very easy at home, right? So on the desk, on the bed, you know, on the chair, here's books that I want to read. So other thoughts that, you know, people in the audience have here, that's good. But one thing that wasn't in there that I was wondering if you could speak about a little bit, if you had tips for rereading, right? Because one of the things that we have time for at home is rereading. And we know that children end up reading the same text with their parents or their caregivers like over and over again, right? Because I love this book and I love the bonding time. So any advice that you would give about parents in rereading texts?
I think that I can definitely give some insight on that. Because I had parents in kindergarten saying that to me all the time. They like to read Goodnight Moon every night before they go to bed, or they like to read this book before they go to bed. And I personally always encourage that if it's something that they want to do and something that brings them comfort. Not only is it bringing them comfort when they're in kindergarten, it's a little bit different because they're so much younger. They're in a lot of those pre-reading behaviors, but it can help them learn how to retell or summarize a story. And then even when the kids are older, I recently had a second grade parent come to me and say the same thing, but rereading the same book, it was the child's library book. They like to read the library book Monday through Friday, then read the other library book Monday through Friday, and they're reading the same book over and over. But really that can be great for their fluency. So if we're not talking about comprehension, we can talk about other aspects of reading, and it really can do wonders for a child's fluency, just in my own experience. But I'd be open to hear what anyone else thinks about that too.
Yeah, Rachel, Georgia, or other folks on the call?
Yeah, I think part of it too, I think fluency is definitely a big draw for rereading. And I think part of it too is focusing a little bit differently each time you read it. And so even just if you're sticking within the resource that we're looking at before, during, after, putting an emphasis on one, a different part of that each time you read, or, scaffolding certain skills. So if you want to help your child work on, summarizing or retelling, that may be something on the first night you read it as the parent, you can summarize for them. Then the second day you kind of do it together. The third day that you start to, so working through skills like that and modeling things for them, and maybe picking, so you can either do it, I guess, 2 different ways. You can pick something different each time, or you can pick one thing and really dive into it across the whole, the whole time that you're choosing to reread the book.
Rachel, any thoughts on rereading at home?
My immediate thought was fluency too, as Carly said, because like comprehension, I feel like fluency is another aspect of reading that maybe parents don't understand or really find to be the most valuable thing. I do feel like a lot of questions I would get as a teacher is like, how can I help them read these words? And while that's very important as well, the way you sound and the expression that you have and the rate that you can read also reflects your comprehension of the text, because you're kind of making it, if you know that text very well, because you're rereading it, you're turning it into almost like a like a show like this, like they could become the characters, and that's just showing if they can become the characters, they can show emotion and showing comprehension through their performance as well and the way that they read it. It also sparked something in me when Carly had said that with kindergartners and their pre-reading skills, rereading a book or trying to read a book that they like with their parents over and over again just reinforces that the way that books are read from start to finish. It has that storytelling cadence to it, and that can then assist them as they encounter books that they don't know.
Yeah. The other thing that I was thinking of was picture books, and how oftentimes, as readers, we don't see everything there is to be seen, right, on a given page in a picture book. And so rereading it, we can see other things in the background and be like, oh, that's some foreshadowing that I hadn't seen before. And so that gives us a chance to deepen our understanding of what we're reading. I don't know if any of you know this book, but when my kids were really, really young, they loved this book called 10 Minutes to Bedtime. You guys know this book? It's by the same author that did Officer something and Officer Turnbuckle and this
Officer
dog.
Buckle and Gloria.
Yeah. It's by the same person that did that. And what's the zoo? The one about the zoo where like the gorilla helps the other. Goodnight Gorilla, is that it? Where like the gorilla helps the other animals in the zoo escape, which is like all good solidarity story. But so in 10 Minutes to Bedtime, like their gerbils or hamsters do like a bedtime tour. So like there's a crowd of like gerbil tourists showing up in this kid's house, and each page is like 9 minutes till bedtime, 8 minutes till bedtime, right? He's brushing his teeth, he's doing this thing. And when I was younger and my kids were younger and we would read it, we would find new gerbils or new hamsters like all the time, like every time we read it, like the basic plot, but you're like, oh look, there's one in the background like taking photos, right? And so so that rereading, gives you a chance to do that close reading, but not in a state standardized test looming over your head kind of close reading, but right, that like engaging with that text multiple times, there's more things that we can find in it, right? Which then sets them up to do that with texts that don't have images in them, right? That you can read it a couple times and still find new things in it. So I have a couple other questions too, but I don't want to take up other folks' time. If other folks who are here have questions, you can either ask it via the chat, or you could come on camera, or just unmute yourself. Could be a question, could be a thought, could be a wondering, all the vocabularies that we use. Right, so they're saying, yeah, people reread other things like shows and movies. Why can't we do it with books? Right. That's the nice thing about poetry and short stories, right? Is that you can reread them and it doesn't feel impossible. I was in college once and I took a course where we were supposed to read everything twice to think about how rereading affected our comprehension. But one of the books we were supposed to read twice in 2 weeks was Moby Dick. And I think everybody cheated. So I think I think the lesson was really how to cheat, because there's no way that everybody read Moby Dick twice.
No.
So 10 Minutes Till Bedtime, yeah, I could read that twice, but not Moby Dick. Other thoughts? Susan, you reread the first few pages every time you finish a book. You go back to the beginning and read the first.
I do. Yeah. So hi, I do. I'm not going to turn my camera on, but I do. Every time I finish a book, I reread the first few pages because I know I've missed things. So I actually share that with my students, that I reread the beginning of the book to make sure that if I miss something, I can see it now. And, it's educational for me. So. I
think that's a good modeling. I certainly do that while I'm reading a book, right? So if I'm a third of the way through or like half the way through, I'll go back to the beginning of the chapter or the section and kind of skim it from like, a fairly clear lighthouse, and then go forward from there. But I like the idea of going back to the first couple of pages, particularly in fiction, right? Because, there may be introducing things about the character or the setting that we only realize much, much later in the story.
I mean, I feel like when you're first meeting the characters, you're not invested enough yet. So by the time you get to the end, you're totally invested, and then you're like, all right, what did I miss about this character? So, you try to teach again, I think more higher readers to do that, because I think they're the ones that like fly through the pages more and they don't digest enough.
Right. I think even with younger readers, one way to do that would be, in addition to writing something, having them draw a picture of what they think the character looks like several points during the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually collect them so that they don't see them. And then at the end of the story, you can give them back all of their drawings, and they can look and see, over five parts in the story where we paused, or the novel where we paused, this is how I pictured the character. And then it went from being, I thought this character was like a beautiful princess or whatever and really nice. And then in the end, it's like, she's the villain. And so now all of a sudden she's like, looks mean and that sort of stuff. Like, so students can use that creative way to do it as well. Or to go back to your, Medi 503 experience, you could do it with a stop motion Lego movie as well.
True.
Take a little bit longer.
Yeah, it'll take a little bit longer. Right?
I do that with my
hours to
students.
make.
I was going to say, I do that with my students instead of drawing. So we're, not necessarily reading chapter books. Even if we're just reading a picture book, sometimes I'll close the book or read the page to myself and say, put her face on your face, or put his face on your face. And I like to see what they're thinking that character is feeling. Or I'll say, like, stand up and do what you think they're doing right now. And then I'll show them the picture and we talk about, like, were you on, were you off? Like, what were you thinking and why did you, get in that position, or why did you make that face? And so kind of going through the character, and we kind of do it at multiple points through the book. So they're kind of really physically feeling what they're feeling and doing what they're doing to kind of keep them going through the book.
It's really the opposite of what we teach them about life outside of reading, right? So when you meet somebody, it's like, don't judge them by their external characteristics. Right? But when you're reading a novel, you're like, ooh, like he's got a scar on his cheek. Something's going on there, right? Like in real life, your mother would be like, don't stare at that man's scar, right? But as a reader, you're like, note to self, he has a scar. Like, why did the author tell me that he has a scar, right? So the ethics of judging characters while we're reading is different than the ethics of judging like real people out in the real world, right? The other thing I thought that you all brought up, which is, I think it takes a little bit of time for teachers to figure out, and I think for parents as well, which is not saying too much, right? Like when you're asking those prompts, right? So, asking like, how is the rhino feeling versus, why is the rhino feeling so lonely, right? So like that second question, you've already sort of taken them 3/4 of the way to the answer of that question, right? But if you're like, how's the rhino feeling? Oh, they're feeling sad, they're feeling lonely. And then if they say sad, then that's a different response to lonely. And then they have to come up with a reason for that, right? Or like, I think on the resource, you have like what's happening versus like, what's the fox doing, right? So if you ask me what the fox is doing, I can tell you because you've already directed my attention to whom I'm supposed to, to think about. So I think this sort of vague, but not so vague that the student's like, huh? But like, to create that opening rather than being so directive. And I think as teachers, it takes a while, right? To not be so directive or to not be so pedantic. And I think because of cultural variations with parenting styles, it may come more or less easy to some parents than others. I guess there's not really a question in there, but I can turn it into a question, which is that like, so for yourself as teachers, like how do you self-monitor so that you're not saying too much, right? When you're asking these prompts or you're sharing these prompts, like, what do you do to make sure that you're not leading the students so much to the answers that you want them to give?
I know one thing that I've done to kind of shift myself out of that, a habit that you get into to kind of give more than they need, is to, rather than asking a question, just asking them to tell you about that and then tell me more. So like, rather than asking a specific question, like you said, like, what is the fox doing? Well, tell me about what's happening. and then they say something, and if it's not exactly elaborate or you think they can say more, tell me more about that. Like just prompting them to keep on adding to their thinking without giving them any more leading information.
Mm-hmm.
So I find myself kind of, shifting my thinking to just like not going in with a question that I don't even know what they're going to answer. So like letting them kind of lead the conversation.
Right. Carly, Georgia, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that what Rachel suggested is a great kind of mindset shift. I know personally it has just taken me time and practice and me blurting out like, why is the fox feeling so,
Yeah.
or like just sort of hearing myself make the mistake of giving such leading questions, and just kind of over time, because you do kind of see the conversations you end up having are really different when you give them these pointed questions. You get very pointed answers because this, and this, versus when you do sort of what Carly's asking, or what Rachel suggested, to tell me more. I want to hear more about that.
Right.
The way that the conversation is, ends up going, kind of it branches out and becomes much deeper.
Yeah, Susan's saying in the chat that she uses the phrase, what do you notice on this page? Right, if you're thinking about like a picture book. And Georgia, I think you still get the formative assessment that you need, right? If you're like, so tell me what's going on, or like, tell me what you're seeing, and the student gives you something that's like way off and doesn't seem to be connected to any textual evidence, right? And you're like, oh, where are you seeing
well, where did that come from? Like,
where did that come from?
What's making you feel like that? And I feel like with this year, I'm seeing with I have a lot of struggling readers. I have a lot of children that are coming into first grade at this point still in the year that cannot read at all. They're really still in this pre-reading stage. And so when I sort of read, smaller things with them, or just like little blurbs, or we look at a couple sentences, or like something like I'll read to you, and they come out with these things, I'm like, okay, like let's think about that. Like, where did you get that from? So I think too, I do feel myself saying, well, let's think about that, versus me being like, no, I want you to focus more on this thing. I said, well, let's think about that. What's making you kind of go there? So yeah, it's definitely something that I do see where they kind of come out of left field. You got to try and track down where they're going.
Yeah, Carly?
Something that I've shared with Rachel and Georgia that a colleague of mine started a couple of years ago is called Bounce the Question. So sometimes when I would be reading a book to my kindergartners, I would try to say something more along the lines of, what do you notice, or what do you think about this? One student would answer, and then the model of this is that a student answers, and then instead of me responding to their answer, I would say, bounce the question. And that student would turn around and look at everybody and say, what do you all think about this? Or something along the lines of, what do you think about this? Or what do you make of this? And then they call on somebody else. And that next person, I had to give them the language because they were so young. So they would ordinarily say something like, I agree with Tommy because da 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 da, or I disagree with Tommy because da 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 da. And then you keep bouncing for a few students. And I just didn't really have to say anything. So I always like that technique. And I think it probably would work a little bit better with older students, but it worked with my kindergartners.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that situation, that's where, like, if a student gives a response that's literally not, has no textual evidence connected to it, right? And it's a classroom situation, and they're offering their opinion, right? To not be like, yeah, Tommy, you're wrong, right? And that's just going to shut Tommy down. You're like, does anybody have any other perspectives on this, right? And that's when you can kind of take advantage of like going to other people's perspective, and then be like, oh yeah, we do see some textual evidence, for that thing. So hopefully Tommy doesn't feel like I'm never going to give an answer again, right? But also don't leave the class with like something that's factually incorrect, right?
Right.
You don't want
And also, Tommy in that situation learns from his peers rather than from his teacher. He hears it how they thought it through and might think it through that way next time.
Right. It's not some super secret grown-up way of reading that only grown-ups could have figured out, right? That like your peers read it this way, and and orient you towards where it could be. So yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of like either bouncing the question or really inviting the conversation, anything to get away from that IRE, right? The sort of teacher says something, student answers, teacher evaluates it, teacher says another thing, and going back and forth from that spoke. That's just like dreadful, right? And so whether you make it explicit, like bounce the question, or like literally don't say anything for a little bit so that other students will be like, oh, what I think is that they can chime in that way. I think like wait time is a little bit more difficult online, I do have to say, for teachers, right? But still, like, commit to that wait time, and so that other students feel like they have a chance to process, and then start sharing some of their ideas.
I think that wait time is hard, for me at least, to understand until I took a step back out of the classroom and was watching other people teach, because I never really realized how quickly I probably turn things around and how fast my pace is until I watched other people doing it who I consider or regard really great teachers. And it's hard because it's kind of awkward. You don't want to sit up there and just be quiet, but it's helpful. It's, I think, one of the most helpful things we can do
Yeah.
is wait.
So yeah, how high do you advise your student teacher to count in her head?
Depends. I mean, sometimes I feel like in that situation, because it is awkward, you count quickly. So I tell her like 10 seconds is maybe a good suggestion, because 10 isn't actually 10,
Right.
But especially when you're nervous, and especially if other people aren't volunteering and you're getting like anxious or whatever, I say just kind of wait to 10. And it works, as I'm sure you all know. Like, some kids just need extra time to process, or they're a little bit nervous. So you do start to see hands coming up sometimes. And then I just tell her, if you really get nothing else, you can always rephrase, or kind of like what you guys mentioned, the bouncing the question. Or even like, okay, just turn and talk with your group first, and then each group nominate somebody to share. So there are different ways to kind of help. And I think the bouncing the question and the group share also helps too, because if a kid did miss something from a story, kind of like you guys said before, they can hear how other people are processing it and comprehending it. So those are some of the things we've done.
And I think when it comes to rephrasing, something that I try to do, say I ask a question and it's too vague, or it's not going anywhere, and there's silence, and you can tell it's not wait time anymore. It's just people going, yeah, I don't know where you're going with this. Is, I'll say explicitly, like, oh, maybe I didn't phrase this right. And so, like, that it's on me as the instructor that I didn't pose the question in a way that is helpful for you to understand. Not, why don't you get this question? But I think I might have asked this question in the wrong way. So let me try to rephrase it. Let me try to restate this and see if that will help, right? So not it's on you, but it's on me, because clearly I didn't set it up so that you can follow kind of what I'm thinking, right? And I think that's really, really important. So other thoughts that people have? Either more generally about sort of the homeschool connection and support, or specifically about reading comprehension?
I did have one more question too. You all talked a little bit about, choosing books that are interesting to the student, right? Not really so much about reading level all the time. What do you suggest, or what are your experiences with some of those students who are really like, I don't like to read anything, I'm not interested in anything at all? You sit with them, you talk with them about their interests, but they're just so kind of avoidant. What are some of those things you do to try to move them along towards feeling more open to reading?
That's a hard one. I would say I think all of us face that issue, and like, one thing that I found that has kind of worked with a second grader who I've been working with, who's really struggling, is just sitting with him and talking about what he likes. And he is one of those kids that was like, I like nothing. The only thing I like is the color purple. And we get those kids. And I brought him a bunch of just, I don't know, pretty books with nice covers. And I find that sometimes that works if you're bringing something that's a little more enticing looking than the books that he's used to, which are like the decodable readers that his teacher's giving him, he's not going to want to take those home and have his mom read those to him. So I guess, I don't know, that's not an answer for every kid. That's just this one second grader. I find that the interest inventories sometimes work depending on what they're interested in. And another thing is just like we have Epic Books, and I know there are a few other sites like that where kids can listen to audio while they're flipping through the pages. And that has been especially helpful with struggling readers just because it's kind of a different format, and I think it just shakes things up. It's not just looking at a book, it's something different. But I'm open to suggestions because I really, that's a tricky one.
So he likes the color purple, like the purple and the Harold and the Purple Crayon, not color
Yes.
purple Alice Walker novel. Okay.
No, not the
Right.
novel.
Not the novel.
He is just one of those students that I like nothing. I don't want to do anything. That kind of learner. So yeah, he said he likes pretty things and he likes purple and he likes. So I brought him books with covers that had pretty covers. One about a unicorn, one about a starfish, and he did take one of them home. I don't know if he read it. So
Purple's top 5 color. I got
okay.
keep it 100. Purple's top 5 color for me. Rachel, you were gonna say?
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that I was in this program, my eyes were open to, which might work more with, I'm not sure about kindergarten, maybe, is like graphic novels or even books with only pictures and no words, because they could still display like at a younger level or a higher level student, they could still display comprehension skills without reading the words to a book. There was it your class, Dr. Jacobson, that we had books with no words?
Yes.
And we had,
Yes.
yeah, I thought that was a really great project that we did, where we had to explain and explore books with no words and talk about how that shows comprehension. So that could be an option, as well as graphic novels, which might just be more visually enticing to a student who may be struggling with a lot of words on a page.
One of the things that struck me this semester, because the course I'm teaching this semester is Read 501, and people are working, every student has to do 7 hours of mentoring with an adolescent, and there's like 28 students, and I would say a good 5 or 6 of them have students who are reluctant readers or kind of disengaged readers. And it was really interesting to me because in the journals that they were writing up, some of the MSU students, some of the older students, my students, were saying things like, I want to figure out a way to like challenge this student or challenge this reader to like, to start reading or to read things that are more complicated, or to challenge them to, to read more demanding things, or challenge them to find something that they like. And I thought that's a really unhelpful operative verb, right? Like if someone is disinterested in something, we don't challenge them to like it, right? We invite them in, right? We try to find ways to invite them to enjoy it, right? It's not like, oh, you don't like spinach, I challenge you to like spinach, right? We try to cook spinach in a way that a child would be like, oh, actually, maybe spinach isn't half so bad, right? But it was striking to me that multiple students used that verb, right, to talk about what they wanted to do with the student they were mentoring, right? That they wanted to challenge them to find things that they liked. They wanted to challenge them, to pick a genre, to challenge them to pick a book that they would like. And it's like, we would never, that's not how it works, right? We try to create opportunities for people to realize that interest, but we don't challenge them to like that, and so I think if a number of my students were using that vocabulary, I'm betting more people also use that vocabulary to kind of conceptualize what is it they're doing, right? They're challenging reluctant readers, or challenging disengaged readers, right? Rather than trying to invite them in, right? To have that conversation. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on sort of operative metaphors or operative verbs, like invite versus challenge versus, I don't know, demand, things that we wouldn't want to do with students because it would be counterproductive to get them to engage.
Yeah, that's something I never really thought about, is just the verb that we're using to describe it. invite rather than challenge. And I think that's probably what we all seek to do is to invite. But I mean, like we were just saying, it's hard sometimes to get a child to want to read. So sometimes it feels to us like a challenge, which is maybe why your students were describing it with the word challenge. Because to us, it is a challenge. It's a hurdle to overcome. And it's a hard one that I certainly don't have the magic answer to yet, but we'll keep trying, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think some of it goes back to, if everything feels like schoolwork of a certain type, then reading loses some of its joy or pleasure, right? Like if every time you read something, there's going to be a quiz or a worksheet after that, it's not fun. Yeah, so they're saying if you get the magic answer, you'll become a millionaire quickly. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that there's ever going to be it is a challenge for teachers, right? And there's never going to be a shortcut, right? Because it's going to be, why is the student disengaged, right? Is it reading itself, or is it external things, right? Is it internal things that are going on with them developmentally, or their community, their family? Like, we know ourselves, there's times in our lives where we read more and we read less, right? Based on kind of the energy that we have for that, right? But as grown-ups, no one's checking in on us Monday through Friday to see how much we've read, right? But if you're a kid, you're like, I read 5 pages, I read 10 pages, like, leave me alone, right? Like, I don't know, I can imagine how much pressure it feels like for some kids, like, like, leave me alone already. Like, I think some kids might feel. Any other thoughts about homeschool connections, working with parents? Rachel, you unmuted. Did you have a?
Oh no, I was just
getting ready. Just getting ready. Yeah. So other questions? Susan, Brenda, Celia, Barbara.
One thing that I always just try to emphasize with parents when they do reach out, even if they're not interested in looking at a resource like this that we've created, is sort of going back to what we've sort of been circling around this last bit of the conversation, which is that they tend to lose the joy. It always feels like a chore. So something that I really try to emphasize with parents is to just enjoy it, no matter what that looks like for you. And so if that looks like your child picking whatever book and saying, I want you to read this to me and I want to sit here, then that's wonderful. That's, working on the joy of reading. They're still learning from it. They're still exposed to the text. They're still exposed to the structure of the story, and just using whatever opportunity to really work on that, especially for those reluctant readers. Like, you don't want to, like, so many parents, I feel like, going back I have so many struggling readers this year, and so many of them they're reluctant because they're being pushed at all seams. They're like, they read with me, they go read with the reading specialist, they go here, then they go home and they do tutoring, and then they do this, and then mom and dad are it's bedtime and let's get this book. And so sometimes just pulling the emphasis off of learn and just try to enjoy and try to rekindle that love for just sitting through a story and enjoying it.
I mean, speaking as a parent and not as a literacy professional, I mean, I think what was really important for me with my own kids, and it remains true to this day, even though they're in college, is finding those shared interests, so that when you're reading a text, the conversation naturally continues through the rest of the day, right? So, at the dinner table, getting ready, to go out in the car, wherever it might be. And you're not faking the funk if, like, you're actually interested in, say, dinosaurs, right? You can read about dinosaurs and have an ongoing conversation about dinosaurs, and not, pretend to like dinosaurs. And then, that's really the best, right? So that if a child's reading about dinosaurs, it's not because they're getting their 10 minutes of reading in to check off on their reading log, right? But it's because you both love dinosaurs, and you want to share your love of dinosaurs. And reading is one way for that love of dinosaurs to be cemented and, extended. And part of that, I think, is, inviting parents and inviting grownups to read about the things that they love as well. Like I saw something online. Somebody was, it was on Twitter or something, and it was like how sad it is. I think I might have mentioned this in one of my classes. It's like how sad it is that when you're a grown up, nobody asks you your favorite dinosaur anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that, like, you know, like when we were a kid, like I don't want to speak for everybody. I think most kids have a favorite dinosaur, right? And then you love that dinosaur, and maybe, you know, you and your friends can get in a fight about who has the cooler dinosaur, who has a favorite dinosaur, right? But like, why is it like when, you know, when you're at a party and you're like meet your spouse, you meet your, you know, workmate spouse, and you're like, oh, what do you do for a living? Blah, 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 blah. How come nobody's just like, oh, nice to meet you. What's your favorite dinosaur? That would make cocktail parties and dinner parties so much more enjoyable if we were like talking to each other about our favorite dinosaurs and not like, you know, something that we read. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's also like, yeah, inviting parents to have fun. Right?
Dr. Jacobson, do you have a favorite dinosaur?
I do. I really like Dimetrodon, because Dimetrodon it's almost like an iguana, but it's the one with that tall sort of fan on its back.
Oh, yes.
It just seems so absurd. Like I'm like, what is the evolutionary advantage of having this really, really tall thing? I also like Ankylosaurus, which is the one that almost kind of has that mace on the end of its tail. So, yes. Rachel, do you have a favorite dinosaur?
I don't know.
We have to brush up on our dinosaur.
Yeah, I have to brush up on my dinosaur. I like the one with the long neck. I don't have all the technical language. The big one with the long.
Diplodocus,
Maybe.
which now called Apatosaurus, apparently. So,
Brontosaurus.
yeah. So, but if it's dinosaurs, if it's cars, if it's comic books, if it's unicorn, whatever it is, right? I think the invitation is that when you're reading, you know, with your child, it shouldn't feel like a quiz, right? It should be like you both like this topic and you both like to read, right? And so to read about it. Susan, hadrosaur, I don't know hadrosaur.
All right, so hadrosaur is the only dinosaur that's been found in New Jersey. Fun fact. Yeah.
Oh,
Cool.
What does it look like?
You'll have to go to the Trailside Nature Center to find out.
Okay.
all right.
That seems like a setup for somebody that like owns stock in the Trailside Nature Center that we're going to go.
I do not. It's something I learned on their field trip. So,
So, all right. Any last thoughts? All right. So hopefully everybody downloaded the link, and thank you three for sharing that resource. And I also think that this is a good example of what a master's program or what a master's class can be, right? That the work that you do in the class doesn't just end at the end of the class and get, you know, stored in the digital dumpster, right? But it actually is alive and can actually contribute to what it is that you're doing out in the classroom. So I want to thank the three of you for demonstrating that like you can pick up a project to do a project that extends beyond getting credit for the course. So, and thank you for coming back and doing this.